All right, y'all, welcome to the show. I got an amazing one for you today. So right off the bat here, we're going to discuss Israel just got caught red-handed, basically making up the allegations that the UNRWA is actually linked to Hamas, and therefore we must cut off the funding, even though the UNRWA is the only agency providing the humanitarian aid in the midst of the genocide of the people of Gaza. They were caught red-handed here. And the Channel 4 did a phenomenal investigation diving into the claims made by the Israeli government that the U.S. immediately agreed to and also cut off funding to the UNRWA as a result of it. So we'll talk about that. We also have some really big news coming out about Trump. His attempt to get presidential immunity for any and all potential crimes has crashed and burned. We'll dive into that. We'll get into the border bill chaos, which has unfolded. You have the Democrats versus the Republicans and the moderate Republicans versus the MAGA Republicans, and everybody's at each other's throats. I'm going to give you the reality of what's actually in the bill, and then we'll talk about some lying scumbags who are just virtue signaling to get in Trump's good graces. And then later on in the show, Joe Biden has one of his worst senior moments of all time, which is saying quite a lot because he's had many of them, but wait until you see this one. And then also we'll get into this little thing called an atmospheric river, which hit California, which is quite literally like a giant river opening up over your head if you live in Southern California. And turns out Southern California is not really built to get that much rain at any given time. So there are some disastrous consequences as a result of it. I mean, it looks apocalyptic in some of the videos that are coming out of there. So we'll talk about that as well. All right, everybody do me a big favor. Please subscribe to the channel. It helps out massively in the algorithm. It costs you absolutely nothing. And without further ado, let's dive into it. So right off the bat here, I want to talk about how Israel was just caught red-handed. So as you all know, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, which is the top court at the UN, they came out the other day and they said it is plausible that Israel is committing genocide. Now, the investigation is going to have to continue. The court case is going to continue. But right off the bat, they said it's plausible you're doing this. Therefore, you need to allow in all the humanitarian aid. By the way, they were blocking 70% of it, right? And there's other terms that Israel has to abide by. Well, immediately after that decision came down, Israel turned around and said, "Oh, we have evidence that the UNRWA, which is the UN agency responsible for helping Palestinians, they are actually Hamas. They are linked to Hamas, and they were involved in the October 7th terror attacks." So that is a big, bold accusation. That is a huge claim. The timing just happened to coincide with the ICJ saying it's plausible you're committing genocide. So Israel comes out, makes that allegation, then immediately the whole conversation has changed. Nobody's talking about the plausible genocide anymore, and U.S. media and U.S. politicians are talking about, oh my God, isn't the UN Hamas? So boom, the U.S. and 9 countries cut off all funding to the UNRWA. Now, by the way, this is the agency that is providing a lifeline in the midst of a genocide of the Palestinian people. They're giving food, they're giving water, they're trying their best to do these things. They even have schools and try to give people employment. And in the midst of what's happened, Gaza being wiped off the map, the U.S. and Israel and 9 countries go, we're going to cut off funding because I was told you were Hamas. Well, Channel 4 decided we're going to do an investigation into this and find out what's up. Listen to what they found.
Children in Gaza are hungry, and the fear is that they're about to get hungrier. Donors to UNRWA, the main UN agency that supports Palestinians, including the UK, withdrew their funding 10 days ago because of allegations in a confidential Israeli document that this programme has now seen. The document repeats an allegation the Israel Defense Force has made many times, that the Hamas terrorist organization has been methodically and deliberately emplacing its terrorist infrastructure in a wide range of UN facilities and assets, but provides no evidence to support its explosive new claim that UNRWA staff were involved in the terror attacks on Israel, just stating, from intelligence information, documents and identity cards seized during the course of the fighting, it is now possible to flag around 190 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist operatives who serve as UNRWA employees. More than 10 UNRWA staffers took part in the events of the 7th of October.
So I want to reiterate, they just said it. They got their hands on the documents. They said there's, quote, no evidence of the Israeli claims. No evidence. No evidence. The U.S. immediately agreed, cut off UNRWA funding immediately. The UNRWA without an investigation, immediately fired the people who were brought up. Quote, no evidence presented by Israel. Again, it's almost like it's a plot or a scheme to change the narrative in the conversation after the ICJ ruled it is plausible Israel's committing a genocide.
Israel gave the document to donors just after the International Court of Justice in The Hague made an interim ruling on a charge of genocide against Israel.
Israel must take immediate and effective measures to enable the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance.
It is utterly shocking that the donors who accuse UNRWA of instrumentalizing aid, as they have done, are themselves weaponizing UNRWA. It is a violation of international humanitarian law. It's a violation of international principles. It's a violation of the ruling by the ICJ, which says nobody should squeeze international humanitarian aid. What's Britain and others done? They've squeezed the aid. And it's a violation, arguably, of the Genocide Convention, because it will devastate the lives of 1.2 million people who were on UNRWA's food lines even before the 7th of October. And that's going to get longer. It will undoubtedly, if unsuspended, lead to mass starvation.
So do you understand what he's saying? As a result of these allegations and the U.S. and all these countries cutting off funding to the UNRWA, he's like, millions of people are going to starve to death. By the way, right now, it's not like the UNRWA was able to do their job unimpeded. No, Israel blocked 70% of the humanitarian aid from getting into Gaza on purpose because they want them to starve. They want them to go thirsty. They want them to die. They want them to be ethnically cleansed. But this is an attempt to make it so they get no help. Nothing. And then as there's no help, they still point their finger and say, terrorist sympathizers, terrorists, you're the bad guys. This is astonishing, man. There's 2.3 million people in Gaza. 2 million of them are now homeless. By the way, what's the number that are Hamas? 30,000. So 2.3 million people, collective punishment against 2.3 million people for the actions of 30,000 people, and now cutting off funding to the one organization that's trying to get help to civilians who are in dire straits. Never in a million years could I have imagined we'd be witnessing what we're witnessing right now. This is something that is going to be written in the history books, where in the future they'll look back at all of us like, what the fuck was wrong with you absolute moral monsters? And you know what? They're going to be right. They're correct.
Apart from emergency aid, UNRWA runs schools, hospitals and other services for 5.9 million Palestinian refugees across the Middle East. It employs 13,000 Gazans, all of whose names have been checked against a UN terrorism list and as recently as last May were vetted and approved by Israel.
So in other words, even if the allegations from Israel are true, Israel has nobody to blame but themselves for that, because they cross-checked these names and said they're in the clear. God, every single layer of this story makes it absolutely worse. I've never seen anything like this before, man.
UNRWA immediately fired the staff members named in the document and mounted an investigation.
Yeah, and again, they did it immediately to avoid any sort of giant international backlash where their funding gets cut. That's why they fired them immediately, and they cut the funding anyway, which again tells you what? This was a plot. This was a plan. They knew, hey, if we bring this up, we'll just change the conversation completely. It doesn't have to be true. Just bring it up. We'll change the conversation completely. And anybody who disagrees with Israel on anything or tries to help even Palestinian civilians, you are Hamas. This is the strategy. We've seen it every single step of the way. It's just now reached its logical conclusion.
UNRWA is playing a critical role. It's true that the Israeli government has been very critical of UNRWA, not now, from many times ago, but we cannot punish 2 million people by depriving them from the support that UNRWA is providing.
According to Israel, yes, you can. According to Israel, yes, you can. They have no problem doing collective punishment against 2.3 million people. No problem whatsoever. That's their official stated policy.
Who will take care of that?
The Israeli Prime Minister, who met a UN delegation last week, is angry that UN reports about the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza were cited as evidence in the genocide hearing.
Oh, my God. So because UN numbers were used at the ICJ, which is the top UN court, this is retaliation and retribution. How dare you track the facts on the ground and report them at the court if it makes us look bad? Again, this is retaliation, revenge, and retribution over that. That's what it is. This is such a con job. I've never seen a more obvious con job in my entire life, and U.S. media across the board fell for it. Again, shout out to Channel 4 for doing a phenomenal investigation here and telling the truth. But it is shameful how quickly U.S. media falls for it, how quickly the U.S. government is in cahoots with Israel, and they cut off funding to this agency, which is absolutely necessary to prevent over 2 million people from starving to death. God damn it.
That UNRWA staff allegedly took part in acts of terror.
I think it's time that the international community and the UN itself understand that UNRWA's mission has to end.
Oh, yeah, their mission has to end. All these Palestinians starve, have no job, don't have hospitals to be able to go to, don't have schools. Your mission needs to end. Look, I don't know how much more clear they can make it. They are saying genocide, hooray, ethnic cleansing, hooray. That's what they're saying. And you still have people pretending like that's not the case and pretending like this is just a super serious and surgical hunt for Hamas, which is why we cut off food, fuel, and water to over 2 million people, which is why we bombed all of North Gaza, told people to go south, and then continued to bomb South Gaza as well. I don't know how to get it through you guys. This isn't a hunt for Hamas. Don't trust a fucking word coming out of Israel from their leaders. They're accusing the one organization doing the most work on the ground to make sure Palestinian civilians don't die. They're accusing them of being Hamas. The accusation was that out of 30,000, 12, and therefore cut off funding to all of it. This is the most absurd thing I've ever seen. By the way, we'll end on this point. Listen to what they say here. This is a real eye-opener, again, so that you understand what Israel's doing here. Listen to this.
That UNRWA's mission has to end.
Today, UNRWA released photographs they say show a food aid truck in Gaza which was hit by Israeli naval gunfire. The Israelis haven't yet commented.
Was that Hamas too? Was that Hamas? Were the Ritz crackers inside that truck Hamas? Were the tents inside that truck Hamas? Was the water Hamas?
In Gaza, the suffering never seems to end. Today, the UN Secretary-General announced an investigation into UNRWA to be headed by a former French foreign minister. If UNRWA were forced to close, another organisation would have to step in. Under international law, in the West Bank and Gaza, the occupying power, which is Israel, would be held responsible.
They don't want another organization to step in, and if another organization were to step in, they would just accuse that organization of having links to Hamas. That's what would happen. Now, by the way, even before this so-called scandal, Israel was blocking 70% of the humanitarian aid from getting into Gaza. 70%. You have every truck that would get to the border, they would mandate everything be taken off the truck, everything would be inspected, and then it'd be put back on the truck. If there's one thing in the truck they personally didn't like, the entire truck would be turned around. So, for example, when there are tents, because, all their houses are bombed, 2 million people are homeless, so they brought in tents. They said, oh no, the pipes that are used to make the tents could be used theoretically for bombs, so now you got to go, now you can't allow any of this stuff in, the food, the water, nothing. Get to the back of the line. 70% of the aid was blocked. There are protests in Israel, civilians who are trying to block 100% of the aid. Now they found a way to block 100% of the aid. Just accuse the UNRWA of being Hamas. Then all the funding gets cut. And what do they say? By March, if the funding doesn't start again, by March, they won't be able to continue what they're doing. Not only is it a genocide, not only is it an ethnic cleansing, they're now doing everything in their power to block the few people on the ground who are trying to do the bare minimum and help the people who are experiencing hunger, thirst, who have nowhere to go, nothing to do, have to sit there and die. They're now trying to block the one organization which is on the front lines trying to prevent the worst things from happening. I have no words. I don't know what else to say. Now, by the way, is the U.S. media now going to take this report and run with it? Are they going to come out and say, oh, okay, sorry, our bad, we were duped. There's no evidence that was presented. They just made claims, and it was accepted blindly. Is that what the U.S. media is going to do? Is Biden going to come out now and say, oh, I saw this investigation which said there's no evidence of the claims, therefore we're going to, turn the money back on and fund them again? Is that what's going to happen? I wouldn't hold my breath. And that says quite a bit about the current state of affairs and the political establishment, doesn't it? Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.